Next is Vulcan Ventilator Panel.
Hello, and thank you for attending the Vulcan Ventilator Panel. This panel will be a discussion of one of the efforts that a collaborative group across the Department of Defense has sponsored specifically to address the need for rapid development and strategic positioning of low-cost ventilators required for the COVID-19 pandemic ventilator supply chain shortage. My name is Joe Althouse, and I'm the Program Manager for Rapid Innovation Initiatives at the Wright Brothers Institute. Today, we have a great panel representing organizations from across the DoD and the DoD innovation ecosystem. I'd like to welcome Colleen Copley, sorry. Colleen, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Colleen Copley, maiden name Panyard. I am originally from the west side of Michigan, so I attended Central Michigan University for my bachelor's actually in education, so a lot different than what I'm doing now. Taught fifth grade, decided it wasn't the forever career, and that's where I looked at going back to school and got a graduate assistantship at Wright State University here in Dayton, Ohio. So they were paying for it, so perfect time to go back. And that's where I heard about the program management positions at Wright-Patt Air Force Base. And I've been with the Air Force ever since. So that was back in 2015 that I started. And I started in a rotational program, which was awesome, being so new to the government and that kind of role. I was able to experience a few different acquisition offices, ranging from ACAT-1 sustainment to foreign military sales to kind of staff work, and then ACAT-1 development as well. So it's been a great experience thus far, and I was happy to be working this Vulcan 5 effort as well.
Great. Lieutenant Colonel Murphy, sir, if you're there, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for the Air Force? Okay, we'll skip over Lieutenant Colonel Murphy. Hopefully.
Hi.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'll try to be quick because I don't know how well my connection. Am I lagged out?
Nope, you're good. Go, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a program manager here at the what we call the DAF RCO, the Rapid Capabilities Office in Washington, D.C. In the March timeframe, I was chopped over the Joint Acquisition Task Force to assist there as a functional lead for alternate ventilators. I have a number of responsibilities and mostly work on airplanes during my day job. But from March through July, I was dedicated to this effort. Over.
Great, thank you. Next, let's welcome Jawad Rachami. Jawad, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing over at Silytics.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Jawad. I'm the CEO of Silytics. We, known as the principal developer of the Vulcan ecosystem and the Vulcan platform. We're a small team. We kind of consider ourselves kind of a special operations team in this environment of innovation scouting, and so we've been very happy to be part of this team.
Great, thanks. And finally, my good friend, actually, we're all friends here at this point, but Matt Sunday, tell us about WBI and what you do there.
Hello, I'm Matt Sunday. I am a member of WBI's Innovation Services team. I'm a mechanical engineer by education, but I've also spent nearly 30 years in the police, fire, and EMS sectors of public safety in the military and civilian sides. My role here at WBI varies as we're a very diversified group of technologists. We take a very much so a hands-on, fail-fast approach to innovation. So when the Vulcan 5 program came up, obviously we wanted to focus on deriving our own ventilator solution, but ended up serving in a program management role. My role specifically was to help to facilitate, expedite, and break down traditional, say, concept refinement barriers, whether that be testing, whether that be supplies, whether that just be coordinating efforts. This program leveraged all of our skill sets. It forced us to work with groups across the country. It forced us to overlap that with government entities and then certifying entities such as the FDA. But ultimately, the point or goal, the outcome of this was delivery for the greater good. So,
yeah, that's great. That's a good segue because I think we should roll everybody back to the beginning of 2020. The beginning of the pandemic, and just put yourself in that mindset of kind of where we were as a country. Everyone had a lot of energy to put forth to this kind of problem that was kind of uniting us all. And recall that we were projected to have a shortfall on the order of 75,000 for ventilators, which at the time was one of the known primary life-saving devices required for the advanced treatment of the COVID-19 disease, which typically manifests in issuous patients as acute respiratory distress. It was this time that the Department of Defense assembled a rapid reaction team of medical professionals and engineers to harness the innovation to address the predicted shortfall. So what happened was they leveraged the Vulcan innovation platform. The team launched the Hack Event Challenge on March 18th in 2020. And 8 weeks later, 5 distinct low-cost ventilators were ready for testing, undergoing production design, and submitted to the FDA emergency use authorization, in a feat that all across the board, we've all agreed that would have taken normally years to accomplish. The original challenge was no small order. The team solicited crowdsourced proposals to build domestically sourced ventilators that would be portable, provide medically relevant ventilation, and cost under $500. And 7 days after the launch, there were 172 submissions within the Vulcan platform, each of which underwent an extensive engineering and clinical assessment from a team of dedicated people that had dedicated themselves to reviewing that volume of information in a very short amount of time. The organizations from which the 5 selected prototypes came are actually a cross-section of inspiring and dedicated work that the DoD innovation ecosystem can bring to bear. The teams that were selected for the project were CoreVent by Caridia, a Silicon Valley-based med tech startup; Blue 3, a small dive company hailing from Florida; the L3 Harris, a DoD prime contractor; Northrop Grumman, and another DoD prime contractor; and finally, the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Panama City, developed the NAVC Prevent. So let's get into some of the questions regarding this project. Lieutenant Colonel Murphy, sir, the project had so many moving parts and participating organizations during the onset of the pandemic. Can you tell us about the demand signal and how this project kind of came to light?
Yeah, and I think every great acquisition story really begins with a great problem statement, something that's very defined and something that you can go and attack. And that's what we had coming into this. We had, based on what we were experiencing during the March timeframe, we understood that there was potentially going to be a large shortfall of ventilators. We understood that, ordering more and building more medical grade ventilators was a very high risk in order to meet that demand signal. And so we needed a backup plan, and alternate ventilators was the backup plan. And it was all about, we had all these restrictions. Not only did we have a well-defined problem statement, but we had a lot of restrictions placed on us because we couldn't do anything to affect the supply chain for the normal ventilators that were already being placed on contract at that time. And so we had to go and that's what drove a lot of our requirements to use non-medical grade components in order to go and develop these ventilators. And so there was, in the beginning and throughout, there were so many organizations, and the Joint Acquisition Task Force was trying to wrangle as much talent and resources as it could across the Department of Defense and across multiple departments. So we were working with FEMA and HHS, and then of course across the services and OSD, and then into academia as well, and then across the medical services as well. So Uniform Services University played a huge role in this. Professionals out of Walter Reed Medical Center. So there was a very steep learning curve in the beginning. Just, you could spend your entire life working in the government and not completely know just how large it is and how many and what kind of resources you have to bring to bear. And that was really the most challenging part in the beginning, was what resources do we have? What experts can I bring to bear? How can I organize them? And so I was very lucky, within the first day of stepping in, Captain David Whitaker out of Walter Reed Navy captain, stepped in and said, "Hey, we've already done the hard work of evaluating a lot of technologies. I believe this is your number one candidate." And, and I said, "Okay." And I went about the process of first reviewing all other candidates that were already there and prepared for me, many of which came from other services that were doing this work to identify, potential alternate ventilators. And so reviewed those. We also had a lot of industry, what we called RFIs, in which the industry were submitting directly to the government proposals on various things that we could do. So there was hundreds of those. And so after a long 24-hour review, I saved the Vulcan effort for last and went through it, and it was a clear leader amongst everything that had been presented to me. And then it was just a matter of figuring out, okay, who's under what authorities are we going to go execute this program, and where we're going to get the money. And that was and that's all a bit arcane, but just so everybody understands that Department of Defense, not a whole lot of people have authority to go build ventilators. So you need sponsors. We had the Defense Health Agency was our sponsor with the authority to go do this work. They're the ones that actually funded the entire effort. That money was then flowed through the Joint Acquisition Task Force and through the Air Force, and then over to eventually I was looking for a team to help me do this conceptual work and get these ventilators designed quickly. And that was where we arrived on WBI, since they were already doing work along these lines and had a pedigree of doing this type of stuff. So it was, using, research agreements through AFRL. And then I still needed a production team. And that's where Colleen and her team stepped in. So you can see this is nothing's ever very straightforward, but we were able to get it pretty solved and the team hammered out, within days. Over.
Great, thank you. Colleen, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here to because a good segue to telling us how your team got formed and the Air Force's Acquisition COVID-19 Task Force, or the ACT team, how that was formed and what that was like during this time of the pandemic.
Yeah, so like Lieutenant Colonel Murphy said, he got to the point of needing a production team. How do we stand that up? We had 5 different designs going through testing that could all be viable, and all had their strengths and weaknesses. So a kind of a call went out for volunteers, and that's how I got involved from a program management role to help with the production stand-up. But it was a huge team within the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center that stepped up to fill this role. So we had program managers like myself that were amazing and kind of spearheading this stand-up, but then also contracting specialists so that they could figure out, what contracting mechanism will we use. And I think most teams decided to start drafting up documents for an undefinitized contracting action, a UCA, just because that would be the quickest to get these companies on contract, and then you can go forward and definitize that contract while they're already producing. But other draft documents like draft RFP, request for proposal, as well as draft SOW, statement of work. The contracting specialists really pulled together their expertise and helped us get all those documents laying flat. But then we also had financial managers to help with the funding mechanism for this, because it did need to be a very quick procurement. Logisticians stepping in to help establish realistic production ramp-up timelines and quantities, establish the liability of all of this because it is going so fast, what pieces and parts should be procured by these development and manufacturing teams, and what we could expect from hospitals, getting the bill of materials laying flat, all that good stuff. And then we also had engineers stepping in to create quality assurance expectations, draft up manufacturing quality reviews, all of that. And this was all happening within a month timeline. We have all these documents kind of shelved, which good news stories, we didn't need thousands of ventilators, right? But these teams were working extremely hard around the clock to coordinate all these documents with the 5 different teams, because each one's unique to that team, right? So making sure they're all lying flat, and that's really when I came in, and then I started helping up on the development side as well.
Yeah, great. And I think what Lieutenant Colonel Murphy and Colleen have kind of suggested here is that the government was working very hard to create a spot for the result of this effort to kind of blossom, to get procured and become a real thing. It was up to the on kind of the front end side, which, you know, Jawad and Matt, that's kind of where you guys lived in this project. Can we talk a little bit about Jawad, the Vulcan experience, and what that was like, how we used it to reach the potential providers, and what that was like, where they came from, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the main things is having a primed ecosystem ready to go. So I remember getting a call from Captain Whitaker, and just for him early on, having looked at the data and knowing that there is this projected shortage in ventilators that really terrified him personally, and a lot of others. If it were to come to that, we would have a real problem. And so we were the, the conversation was in the background of interactions we had with Vulcan already, with Joint Special Operations Command and that team there. And so we talked about what can we do, and he was, to his credit, very action driven. He needed to do something. We employed Vulcan right away, within 24 hours. He put out a very impossible challenge, and he knew it. But we talked about it, and we thought this is the prime, a great time really for innovation. It's if you really want to challenge people, capacity of our country to really innovate, it's at times like this, when you have an urgency and you don't have time and you don't have money, to do anything, and you just gotta really just appeal to your imagination. And so we put out the call for, with a response time of 7 days. I have to confess that, when we talked about it with other people, they thought it was a fool's errand. It was just not going to happen. We did anyway, because the system, the ecosystem was ready. The platform was there. The experience with the platform was there as well. So we launched 7 days later, as you mentioned earlier, Joe. We got 172 very diverse solutions as well, from across the spectrum: academia, nonprofit, commercial, government, as you mentioned. A lot of compelling ideas too, a lot of diversity in the engineering methods and designs that were proposed. It was extremely gratifying to see that in 7 days. The other thing that was very important was because of the prior interaction, as I mentioned, that we had with other teams. We already had an OSD team, that's an engineering team, that was familiar with Vulcan. They've used it multiple times for other events. They just jumped on that. And within one day, I remember it was a Friday, we closed the submission midnight on a Thursday. 6 o'clock in the morning, those guys were working. And by the end of the day, they had done engineering analysis on all 172, which is never seen anything like it before. And then they passed the baton to the clinical team in Walter Reed and USU. Those were all medical doctors in the armed services, and and they did their assessment on a Saturday. And we were with them on telecon Saturday and Sunday morning. By about Sunday 2 p.m., they had recommendations. They had 5 recommendations that you've cited, and we moved on from there. Adi, took the baton, and Colleen, from that point on, to get the funding as well. And I think, just to kind of complete what, Adi was saying earlier, Lieutenant Colonel Murphy, one of the things, and we'll never know unless he tells us all the details of what happened, but I mean, he had to fight some battles there to try to get the funding. But in that lag time, nothing was really lost. The teams were working ahead of time, and because they knew, Lieutenant Colonel Murphy will do his job, and we'll get things and break some doors and get it working. But we didn't stop. nothing ever stopped. And so that was extremely important early on to get that momentum and get it through, as Lieutenant Colonel Murphy and Colleen just talked about, to get it to that step.
So I think we've really described well, I think, the kind of the front end logistical challenges, getting to be talked about in this context, to organize all these government agencies and get this kind of kicked off. We talked about where we're trying to head, right, with the production and the procurement side of the house, kind of standing up. And Matt, we give us a sense of what some of the challenges were in this environment, trying to pick up these 5 prototypes, work and coordinate with the teams, and then drive them towards the procurement hands of the Air Force.
So first and foremost, I'd say communication and information sharing was the biggest, one of our biggest challenges. As the size and scope of this grew, what felt like exponentially every day, with the number of folks that were involved and what the realization of the tasks that had to be conducted, we really found that traditional email, telephones, and whatnot were insufficient for so many moving parts. What we had to do is basically what a lot of companies did. We transitioned to the Zoom meeting space, but really even that was not enough. And so we went to a channel-based messaging platform called Slack. Now that helped us connect. It helped us develop channels for different groups to connect. It helped us manage information, both publicly and privately. You can have private chat rooms, but it ultimately also served as a searchable repository and an archive for some of the program's information. If you had any questions, you can go look it up yourself. You don't have to continue to reach out via email, making extra phone calls. So that was hugely helpful with regard to overcoming that roadblock of communications. The next was the idea that the country was starting to shut down. If we take our minds back to that day or those days, facilities closures, meaning the base is closing, even at WBI, we're shutting down. So obviously communications, the managing communications it became even more challenging. Support facilities were starting to shut down. So these innovators, these 5 teams that were trying to work are now having to scavenge parts, tap into own personal stockpiles. They were utilizing facilities that were outside of their traditional workspace. I mean, we have engineers from these primes that were working in garage. So these were true garage builds at Joe's house down the road, which then got out of hand. So then they ended up in Bob's barn, in the county over. So this is exactly how these devices were being developed, which was very unique. But it just shows that kind of no quit mindset of these folks. They didn't have the support of the tools, the equipment, even the personnel from their main facilities, because a lot of those folks have been furloughed. Another challenge or roadblock that we had is the fact that these teams were scattered all over the country, a variety of different time zones, which made meetings very difficult. By very difficult, what I mean is evenings, weekends, nothing was off the table. Everybody was working through the evenings into the weekends to try to hold up their part of the deal. And travel was typically made possible by those who were willing to self-quarantine. We had folks that were willing to get devices where they needed to go, really no matter what the cost, even if that meant that they had to lock themselves down for 2 weeks. But in all those challenges that we managed to, I'd say very well, the FDA served as one of our greatest challenges. That was one of our toughest roadblocks because it was a constantly moving target. We had folks building ventilators that functioned within 3 to 5 days. Now they still needed to do more testing. They were putting them together that quick, but that out of PVC and plywood. But understanding that regulatory pathway, and as we started to engage in it, it was very difficult to get the emergency use authorization documentation appropriate, because every time you handed it in, they handed it back with even though we only asked for this much testing, they added more testing or more concerns or so on and so forth. So what did we do at WBI? We shifted. We realized we needed a clinical research organization, reached out, and within a weekend, within a 4-day period, we engaged multiple CROs. We vetted them. We kicked off and had on contract and executed a clinical research organization who proved themselves to be invaluable. And just an announcement for everybody, I was notified today that we should be receiving our first UUA this week through the Corvent. They just got notification back from the FDA that it should be announced this week. So
That's great. Yeah, and we while we were hoping, if you go back and flip through the Trello boards or the program management pages that we had pulled together, those FDA EUAs were supposed to be a long time ago, but it was not necessarily any fault of any one particular group, other than it's just an evolving and just kind of a crazy situation that as we learn more and more, we were able to kind of pivot and move forward, and that's a really good example of I think what happened throughout the project. Jawad, can you you mentioned a little bit, and I was hoping that you could kind of, and Matt said it as well, but kind of let us in on like kind of the mindset of the folks that we were as we were working on this and kind of going through it. Let us know what people were thinking about.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, to me, teams matter, right? Teams matter a great deal, especially when it comes to things like this. And this team in particular, I've said it early on in the project. One of the things that strikes you is the how this team just is ego free. Let's start with that. There is really no ego in this team. And everybody was just willing to do everything. We've got CEOs transporting things. We got medical doctors coming out of ORs to help, and I mean, it's just amazing. I can go on and on with stories, but I'll start with Lieutenant Colonel Murphy as well, because I think it matters when you have a mindset on the government side that understands that my job is to go get the resources and empower this team and get out of the way, let them do their job. And so I think that's one of the things that Lieutenant Colonel Murphy got very early on. He fought the battles to get the resources needed to empower this team to do its job. And again, I mean, we've seen stories like we had one of our team members, if you remember, Joe, coming up on Easter Sunday, from North Carolina, drove all the way up to Washington to meet the first prototypes, and it had to sacrifice for that to do that. We've like I said, I had personally medical doctors in between shifts in their OR in Walter Reed coming out to help me with movement of the ventilator prototypes and on and on. Colleen and her team, really racing to get airlifts, which like unheard of really in that kind of time of period to do that. So the government and industry and just really doing some incredible things. But I think it starts with the team, that awareness that we have common purpose. Yeah. And because we have common purpose, there is no, we are cross-functional. We're going to do whatever is necessary because of what Matt said. We were all scattered around the country. And so we had to do the best we can where we were. So the testing facilities were here in the capital, national capital region. And so the people who were here were able to chip in and get things done. People who were somewhere else were able to get the logistics and so on and so forth. Even one of the things we talked about, cooperation, right? Amongst the industry teams, it's amazing. It's actually pretty astounding to see that, because if you look at these prototypes, they were essentially competing in a way. They're different designs and they were competing, but you didn't see that. What you had is every day on the scrums, we had full flat exchange of information. Not only that, as you remember, we had Blue, for example, small business in Florida, opening its facilities and providing its test lungs to a big team, right? We had a big team in Northrop Grumman allowing their consultant and his lab to be available to other teams, and so on and so forth. These dynamics were constant throughout this project. And I think this tells us something. It gives us a window of what's possible, right? So, people that may be cynical for good reasons at times, that the government is not able to rapidly innovate and all that, we're giving them a window of what's possible. It is possible. Now, we're not saying that this could be replicated within the time span that it's been done for all the programs. But even if it's 3 times or 4 times the length of that, that's outstanding, right? But you have to assemble the right teams. You have to have the right management and enablement from the government, and have the right tools in the mix and the common purpose. You did that, you'll get results like we did here.
That's a really good point, Jawad. Colleen, we you mentioned it early. You set up the acquisition team and then helped then look backwards when that kind of had to hit the pause button, right? And you kind of look backwards, and the government team then started helping the development teams in a way. And I think what happened was we all realized, what Jawad just said, that this truly is, a flat effort. This truly is a partnership. To the people who think, that working within the DoD can't envision something like this happening within 3 months, how did you guys work together to get it done so quickly? And what agencies got pulled in? I think Lieutenant Murphy talked about that on the front a little bit, but what was that like for you guys?
Yeah, so honestly, I feel like Matt and Jawad hit it pretty well. A big one was communication, like Matt said, so bringing the team together, even though we couldn't physically be together. But then to Jawad's point, the passion. If you go back to that point in time, we were all pretty much on stay-at-home orders. It was pretty gloom at the time, and I think everyone around the world was really thinking, how can I help? Right? How can I help in this scenario? And so the individual passion for this from each team, their willingness to work around the clock, like I can't take credit for that, right? That comes from within, because I think everyone just really wanted to help. But the other thing, and this can kind of reflect back to typical acquisition, is being okay with imperfection, right? Lieutenant Colonel Murphy and Jawad kind of touched on, the goal here was low cost, as quick as you can, whatever parts you can get from your local, supply store, whatever it was. So I think everyone came in knowing, like, this is not going to be perfect. And I think in the acquisition, that's kind of where we get caught up. We try and make perfect requirements before we ever even go into a design phase. When we get to design, we try and make everything perfect. We're looking for that 100% solution. And sometimes it's okay to have the B- solution, right? And in this case, it was okay to have like a C solution, as long as it filled that gap in the supply chain, without interrupting the typical medical ventilator supply chain. So I think being okay with imperfection is kind of one of the lessons learned from this, that I think people can take back into their normal day jobs.
That's really interesting. I remember on the front end of our, when your team started to join in on the calls a lot more and trying to talk them through what we were trying to do, because we had lots of different people that got assigned to different teams, and just trying to, I'm waiting for that mindset shift, waiting for them to be like, it's not because we're trying to get to that perfect, we don't have the requirements that acquisition normally has, and it didn't take long at all, of course. Like you said, once we realized that this is the type of program where what we need is action and the work to be done, rather than, the normal, what people would normally consider maybe bureaucracy, which in a lot of times is relevant and necessary. In this case, you guys were taking care of a lot of that stuff for us, just by being there, which I think helped tremendously. Moving on here a little bit, let's see, Lieutenant Colonel Murphy. Given all that's been said here, what do you think some of the lasting impacts or long-term implications for this project are for the military, one, but also maybe some civilian context as well?
Sure. I would say the immediate lasting impact is, more or less, we created an entirely new space in industry. And there's a little bit of nuance here in that, a lot of the earlier devices that did receive EUAs were not ventilators that you would use in an ICU to save somebody's life and then to keep them sustained. And so those were, more or less automated bag valve devices. Here we were going for something that was very difficult to do and had not previously been done, even with medical grade equipment. We have deployable devices in the military, but they are not intended to operate to sustain somebody's life over a long period of time. Particularly that is experiencing something like COVID-19. And so, that was something that I'll always be very proud to have been a part of, because now we have devices that are coming into industry and into the commercial market to fill this, to provide a solution, a low cost solution that is better for everybody else in the world, and maybe it's not the best solution for the United States because we have this very large medical infrastructure, but places in Africa who had on the number of 100 ventilators in the entire continent, or in India or any of these other places, and they don't have connections inside in their hospitals to hook up to air and all these other things. That's I think that's something that's going to have a long lasting impact, at a global scale. I'm very happy to be a part of that. Then I would just say this taught me a lot of lessons too in how acquisitions could be accomplished. I mean, being a part of the Rapid Capabilities Office, we're always looking for new ways to go fast, but this was incredibly fast, and we really had to take a lot of risk. And sometimes there's time and place to take risk, and this was one of them. And we had to do everything simultaneously, and that's what Colleen was touching on. It's like this whole idea that I'm going to develop the devices, and I'm going to figure out how to build them, and I'm going to stand up production lines, and I'm going to get the contracts ready, and I'm going to be thinking about fielding and training, all while we're still tweaking the devices. And that was quite remarkable to see. And I know parts of industry do take that approach. And that's something I hope to bring back into the DoD and get an opportunity to try again in that manner. But those were just some of the lessons that I learned along the way. Over.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, sir. Really quick, we got a few minutes left here. Matt, I'm gonna jump at you here real quick, and I'm just gonna ask you what was the most rewarding piece for you for this experience?
I would say it's a couple different fronts. Contracting and contract management. I know that sounds silly, but it was executed in a manner that allowed the innovators to focus on the task at hand, and that is not something you ever see in programs. Okay. And then I'm going to go back to what Jawad had said. The team's commitment to the cause, the collaboration amongst the teams, responsiveness, transparency of progress. That's another thing. Being honest with yourself. I mean, these teams said, "Hey, I'm not ready. Can you take my slot at the testing?" Flexibility, professionalism. I made a few notes, obviously, but I just have never seen an exercise where folks were so selfless, where they sacrificed nights, weekends, special occasions with their families to deliver on time and on target. And here's why they did it. We all still were in the mindset that it's your neighbor, your friend, your spouse, child. They could be the next person that needs a ventilator that's not available. That was real. That was real at that time. And it changed the way people worked. And I think it's changed the way we innovate. And doggone it, Jawad said it earlier, but it has shifted mindsets, and it's allowed us to reimagine what's actually within the realm of possibilities. And that is what I've learned. That's the most rewarding takeaway element of this. We said we can't build a ventilator for $500. We got over it, and 2 weeks later, we had ventilators being delivered that were sustaining life in a laboratory evaluation. 2 weeks.
Yep, that's great, Colleen.
Well, I think Matt stole my notes. I don't know. I have, first, just being part of this journey was awesome. Being able to see everyone step up, like Matt said, working around the clock, set that time aside, but then the competition, the competitors working together, sharing their knowledge, sharing their discoveries, like Jawad said, their labs, their equipment. In acquisitions, you never see competitors sharing that kind of information. It's always proprietary, right? So it was really amazing to see that, and just how much everyone was willing to step up.
Jawad, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would just say, everything they said. And I would just add that for us, it's extremely gratifying to see that, kind of as we envision this possibility of doing this in a way that's flat, as we talked about, as collaborative, as connected. And that's what we set out to do with Vulcan, really. And so it's gratifying for me personally, I have to say. But it makes me proud to be an American, to be honest, and to be part of this team, because this is what America, I think, is about in general, this diverse team coming together with common purpose to solve big problems. And we are capable of doing this.
Yeah,
we are absolutely capable, and it makes me proud.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the time. If anybody would like to learn more about this project, the team has developed a case study website. Sorry, that was my timer right there. Case study website, vulcan-v.com, and we can get the word out. So check WBI social media and mailing lists for opportunities and competitions like this. Vulcan probably has something very similar. So that's, Jawad, what's the Vulcan website?
Vulcan-soft.com.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.